It's critical to talk about risk now because the Canadian environment, both regulatory and economically speaking, is more difficult than it's been in the past. In our recent CEO survey, it showed that more than 76% of Canadian CEOs are more concerned about rising threats and risks than they have been in the last 3 years. These risks span an entire spectrum. Could be regulatory environment related, tax related, financials, social, corporate responsibility, technological with cyber threats, as well as disruptors entering the marketplace. Clients are really grappling with a very broad spectrum of risk at this point. They've done a very good job historically at dealing with financial risks, right? But when we think about risk, there is an entire landscape or spectrum to deal with here. So categories like social responsibility, environmental risks, compliance risks, technological risks, even geographic related risks that could exist depending upon their operations. And so what we're seeing now certainly is companies trying to get their arms around that entire landscape of risk. Certainly when you think about cyber risks as a specific example, some of our surveys results have shown that more than 40% of known cyber attacks are attributed to third parties that the companies do business with. So if you pause for a moment on that and think about most of the organizations out in the marketplace today, they don't operate in a silo. They're highly interrelated or interdependent upon other organizations, be they service providers, vendors, business partners, etc. And so those third parties are really critical in enabling them to conduct their business successfully. So if you think about where we started at financial risk, as organizations really focused there, they evolved to thinking about that broader landscape of risk within their proverbial four walls. Now they're being challenged to think about that broad landscape of risk, but including those third parties that they manage, and that is a very, very difficult task. I think a lot of companies need to start by thinking a little bit more strategically about risk. Think from top down. A lot of organizations over the last years have really started ground up, and they came up with a number of different risks facing their organization, potentially across that landscape that I described. However, to be effective, you need to think a little bit more strategically about what are your business objectives that you're trying to achieve, and what are the risks to those. If you can tie your risks to those business objectives, it's a much more powerful conversation, not only at the board and the C-suite level, but it's much easier to cascade those messages down throughout the organization so that we get everybody in the organization working towards the same thing and managing those risks in an effective manner. PwC can help companies dealing with this diverse set of challenges and risks by coming in and assisting you at thinking about that top-down level of risk across that entire risks landscape, or if you need in a certain area of risk that the organization may not be as strong in internally. We can also come in and help management think about the risk reporting. A lot of this comes down to having not only the right information, but how you communicate it in a way that is both digestible and effective in what it's trying to relay as the key messages. So we have a number of examples where we work with clients to help tailor some of that messaging around the risk reporting to make sure that it is hitting the mark and sending the right messages that management is intending. Organizations are definitely recognizing the need to understand risk and respond to their risks in a much more effective manner. Our CEO survey showed that more than 92% of CEOs believe that there is a need for further understanding and reporting upon key risks facing the organization. I think going forward, it's really about how they look at those risks from a much more strategic perspective and how they cascade those communications through the organization to make sure that everyone is on the same page around those key threats and risks that are facing their organization and how they're going to respond to them and manage them to at a level that they consider acceptable. So a couple of recommendations around how organizations can measure and communicate key risks include, first, I think starting with an understanding of your key business objectives and tying your key risks to those business objectives. That makes the conversation much more strategic in nature and much more powerful, whether you're at the board level, the C-suite, or staff below. Secondly, I'd think about how you're managing or how you're communicating those risks. Many times, organizations are reporting upon a volume of risks, and it makes it very difficult to kind of swim through and figure out which are the key risks that we're really trying to manage to, and are we managing them to what we consider an acceptable level. focusing your reporting on what you consider to be those key risks, whether that be a top 10 or top 20 or 25, is critical, but then thinking about how you report that probably in a fairly visual and digestible manner such that you can relay to your key stakeholders, here's the risk, here's how we're managing it, and are we within an acceptable level of management right now, or do we need to take further actions in order to reach that place that we consider acceptable?